The wind screamed like a spirit in agony, drowning out the sickening crunch of Kale's bones hitting the frozen earth. Cast out by his own blood, stripped of his furs, and tossed into the blinding white void, he knew death wasn't just a possibility, it was a guarantee. With fingers turning black and blood turning to ice, he dragged his broken body toward the only shelter the mountain offered, the forbidden maw known as the Den of Death. It was a cursed place where ancient nightmares slept, and from which no human ever returned. There, in the crushing blackness, Kale surrendered his spirit to the ancestors, closing his eyes for the last time. But death did not come. Instead, hours later, he was jolted awake by a colossal saber-tooth weight, crushing his ribs and a suffocating, living heat. The very air vibrated with a deep, guttural rumble that shook the stone floor beneath him. Paralyzed by primal terror, he opened his eyes and realized his fatal mistake. He was not alone. 10 pairs of amber eyes burned in the darkness, circling him like floating embers. 10 apex predators, their fangs, like curved ivory daggers, formed an impenetrable wall of muscle and fur around him. The massive alpha, a scarred titan of the ice, lowered its head, bringing its crushing jaws inches from the warrior's exposed throat. Kale's clan had left him to freeze, but fate had prepared a far more brutal end, or so he thought.
If your soul also longs for the age of ancient beasts, and you want to hear more legends about loyalty that time has forgotten, honor our tribe and subscribe to the channel now. I want to know who is sitting around our fire today. Comment below from which part of the world you are watching this story.
The sound of bone-striking permafrost was louder than the wind. It was a sickening, wet crunch that echoed in the hollow of Kale's chest before the pain actually registered. Then, the world spun a chaotic blur of white snow, gray sky, and the towering fur-clad legs of the men he once called brothers. Kale gasped, trying to pull air into lungs that felt like they had been punctured by icicles. He tasted copper, blood. He pushed himself up on trembling arms, his knees scraping against the unyielding ice of the clearing. "Stay down," a voice rumbled from above. It was heavy, like 2 stones grinding together. Kale looked up. Karn stood over him, blocking out the pale, sickly sun. The warlord of the Clovis tribe was a mountain of muscle and scar tissue, draped in the pelt of a cave bear that he had killed with his own hands. In his grip was a spear made of mammoth ivory, the tip stained dark. But it wasn't the spear that threatened Kale now. It was the look in Karn's eyes. It was the look a man gives to a broken tool before he discards it into the fire. "You had one order," Karn spat, his breath forming thick clouds of steam in the freezing air. "Clear the den. Kill the competition. That is the law of the ice." Kale wiped the blood from his lip, his defiance flickering like a dying ember. She was nursing Karn. She was thin, starving. She wasn't a threat. She was a mother. The memory flashed behind Kale's eyes, the gray wolf, cornered, ribs showing through her mange, her eyes wide with terror, not for herself, but for the 3 balls of fur whimpering beneath her belly. Kale had lowered his spear. He had looked into that animal's soul and seen a reflection of their own struggle, the desperate clawing need to keep the next generation alive in this frozen hell. Karn didn't see souls. He only saw targets. "Mercy is a sickness," Karn growled, stepping closer. He kicked Kale in the ribs, sending him sprawling back into the snow. "And sickness spreads. If you will not kill the beasts, then you are no better than them. You are prey." The tribe watched in silence. 30 warriors, women and elders, formed a circle of judgment. None dared to speak. To speak against Karn was to invite the cold. Kale looked for support, a glance, a nod, but found only eyes turned away in shame or fear. In the era of the Great Cold, morality was a luxury they could not afford. Survival was the only god they worshipped, and Karn was its high priest. "Strip him," Karn ordered. The command hung in the air, sharper than the frost. Kale's eyes widened. "Karn, ... The storm is coming. To take my furs is murder." "No," Karn smiled, a cruel twisting of lips that lacked all warmth. "Murder is what I do to enemies. This is nature deciding if you are worthy." 2 of Karn's enforcers moved in. They didn't look Kale in the eye as they tore the heavy bison cloak from his shoulders. They ripped the wolfskin boots from his feet. Layer by layer, his protection against the world was stripped away, leaving him in only his thin curing leather tunics. The cold didn't wait. It attacked instantly, like 1,000 invisible needles piercing his skin, seeking the heat of his blood. Karn leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Kale could hear. "Go to the mountain, Spirit Walker. If the beasts are your brothers, let them warm you." With a final shove, Kale was sent stumbling out of the circle and into the white wasteland. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The shame burned hotter than the freezing wind. He had been the best tracker, the sharpest eye, the one who found the herds when the bellies of the children were empty. And now he was a ghost walking. He walked for hours, or maybe minutes, time distorted in the whiteout. The blizzard descended with the fury of a scorned god. The wind screamed, tearing at his exposed skin, turning his fingers blue, then white, then numb. The landscape was a blur of hostile gray and blinding white. Every step was a battle against the deep snow that tried to swallow his legs. His breath came in ragged gasps, freezing in his throat before it could reach his lungs. "Keep moving," a voice inside him pleaded. "If you stop, you sleep. If you sleep, you die." But where could he go? The sun had vanished, swallowed by the storm. The only landmarks were the jagged silhouettes of the black crags, sharp volcanic rocks that jutted out of the ice like the teeth of the earth itself. Kale's vision began to tunnel. The cold was no longer painful. It was a heavy, seductive weight, inviting him to lie down. His legs felt like dead wood. He stumbled, his bare foot catching on a hidden root, and fell hard. The snow felt surprisingly warm against his cheek. It would be so easy to stay here, to let the drift cover him, to become just another frozen bump in the landscape, preserved forever in the ice. No, he forced his head up through the swirling curtain of snow. He saw it, a dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain. The forbidden cave. The elders called it the Den of Death. Legends said that the shadows inside moved on their own, and that the wind, blowing from its mouth, carried the scent of blood that never dried. It was a place where demons of the ancient world slept. But to a freezing man, even a demon's lair offers shelter from the wind. Kale crawled. He couldn't feel his hands anymore, so he dragged himself by his elbows, leaving a trail in the snow that the wind erased seconds later. Every inch was agony. His body was shutting down, his heart slowing its frantic rhythm to a sluggish thud. He reached the mouth of the cave. The wind howled behind him, furious that its prey was escaping, but the air inside was still. It smelled of musk, old earth, and something metallic. Kale collapsed just inside the threshold. His hand brushed against something hard and smooth on the floor. He didn't need light to know what it was. A skull, human, beast, it didn't matter. He was just another bone on the pile now. He rolled onto his back, staring up into the abyss of the cave ceiling. He had no fire, no weapon, no clan. The cold had seeped into his marrow. As his consciousness began to fade, drifting away like smoke in the wind, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had refused to kill the innocent, and for that he would die. There was no glory in it. No song would be sung of Cale the exile. Darkness took him. The silence of the cave swallowed his breathing. Outside, the storm raged on, burying the world in white, while inside, something in the deep shadows shifted. The darkness was not empty, and it was hungry. Death was supposed to be cold. That was what the elders had always whispered around the fire, that the spirit leaves the body like smoke, drifting into a numb, silent gray. But Cale was not cold, he was burning. Consciousness returned to him not as a light, but as a heavy, suffocating weight. He was pinned against the hard stone floor, unable to move his arms or legs. The air was thick, hot, and smelled of something pungent, a mixture of wet fur, raw meat, and ancient dust. It was the smell of a predator's den, concentrated and overwhelming. He tried to gasp, but the weight on his chest made it impossible to draw a full breath. Panic, sharp and electric, surged through his frozen limbs, waking his nerves with jolts of pain. He wasn't dead, he was trapped. Am I buried? Did the cave collapse? He strained his ears against the silence, but it wasn't silent. The darkness was vibrating. A low, rhythmic sound thrummed through the rock beneath him, resonating in his own ribcage. THRUM ... THRUM ... thrum. It wasn't the sound of falling rocks or the wind outside. It was organic. It was the sound of colossal lungs expanding and contracting. Cale opened his eyes. At first, there was only the crushing blackness of the cave. Then, the storm outside granted him a moment of terrifying clarity. A bolt of lightning shattered the sky beyond the cave entrance, and for a split second, the interior was bathed in a flash of blue-white light. Cale's scream died in his throat, frozen by sheer, primal horror. He wasn't buried under rocks. He was buried under bodies. Massive, golden-furred mountains of muscle surrounded him. He was lying nestled against the flank of a beast the size of a bear, but with the sleek, lethal build of a cat. The lightning flash burned the image into his retinas, the curved ivory daggers protruding from jowls that could crush a human skull like a bird's egg. Sabertooths, the great fangs, and not just one. As his eyes adjusted to the returning dark, the afterimage of the lightning revealed the truth. There were at least 10 of them, a coalition, a nightmare made flesh. He had crawled into the den of death to die, and he had tucked himself into the center of the slaughter. The vibration he felt was their collective purring, a sound so deep it was felt more than heard, a frequency that rattled his bones. Cale stopped breathing. He forced his heart to slow down, terrified that the mere thumping of his pulse would wake the monsters. He was a mouse in a pit of vipers. A single movement, a single scent of fierce sweat, and he would be torn apart before he could blink. Why am I alive? The question hammered in his mind. Why haven't they eaten me? Then the weight on his chest shifted. The purring next to his ear stopped. A massive head lifted from its paws. 2 eyes, glowing like molten gold in the darkness, opened and locked onto him. Kale stared into the abyss of the predator's gaze. This was the Alpha. Even in the gloom, Kale could see the jagged scar running from the beast's ear down to its jaw, a testament to a battle that should have killed it. The tiger didn't roar, it didn't strike. It simply watched him with an intelligence that was terrifyingly calm. Kale lay paralyzed, his own eyes wide and watering. He waited for the snarl. He waited for the lips to curl back and reveal the killing teeth. He remembered the stories of the elders. The great fang knows no mercy. It is a storm of claws and hunger. But the storm did not break. The Alpha lowered its massive head slowly. Kale flinched, squeezing his eyes shut, anticipating the bite. He felt hot, wet breath wash over his face, smelling of iron and musk. Rough whiskers brushed his frozen cheek. The beast inhaled deeply, scenting him. It was smelling the cold on him. It was smelling the rejection. Kale was not acting like prey. Prey runs, prey fights, prey screams. Kale was as still as a stone, resigned to his fate. And perhaps, in that resignation, the beast recognized something familiar. This was not a hunting ground. It was a sanctuary for the broken. The Alpha huffed a sound almost like a sigh and laid its heavy head back down, directly across Kale's legs. The weight was immense, pinning him to the floor, but it was also undeniably warm. Kale's mind couldn't process the contradiction. The most lethal killer of the Ice Age was using him as a pillow. The heat radiating from the tiger's body began to seep through Kale's thin tunic, reaching his frozen skin. The pain of the frostbite began to recede, replaced by a stinging, throbbing warmth. Around them, the other shapes shifted. A tail draped over Kale's arm. A heavy paw pressed against his side. They adjusted their positions, tightening the circle, sealing the heat in. Kale realized with a jolt that they weren't keeping him prisoner. They were huddled together against the freezing draft of the cave entrance. To them, he was just another warm body in the pile. A strange, hairless, fragile thing, but a source of heat nonetheless. Tears, hot and unbidden, pricked Kale's eyes. He had been cast out by his own kin, left to turn into ice by the men who had known him since birth. Yet here, in the dark, surrounded by monsters that had no reason to spare him, he was being kept alive. The irony was sharper than the cold. The humans had been the beasts, and the beasts were offering him the one thing humanity had denied him, a place in the circle. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving Kale exhausted beyond measure. The rhythmic purring of the Alpha resumed, a hypnotic lullaby of power and danger. It vibrated through Kale's spine, a constant reminder that death was inches away, sleeping with one eye open. If I move, I die. If I sleep, I might wake up. Kale looked at the entrance of the cave, where the blizzard still raged, a wall of white death. Then he looked at the amber eye of the Alpha, which was slowly closing again. For the first time since his banishment, Kale stopped shivering. He let his head fall back against the stone, surrounded by the breathing, living furnace of the pack. He was a prisoner. He was a guest. He was a curiosity. But he was warm. And for tonight, that was the only victory that mattered.
Warriors, bringing the Ice Age back to life and recreating every detail of these beasts requires immense dedication. If your heart beats faster with these tales and you want them to continue, honor our effort by subscribing to the channel now. It is your support that keeps our fire burning. And I want to know the reach of our pack. Comment below. From which part of the world is your tribe watching us today?
This wasn't a prime hunter in the peak of its youth. This was a king who had lost his crown, a warrior who had fought too many battles and had been cast out by younger, stronger rivals. Kale sat up slowly, his movements fluid and non-threatening. He didn't cringe, he didn't cower. He looked at the alpha, and for the first time, he didn't see a monster. He saw a mirror. "You were rejected too," Kale whispered, his voice raspy from dehydration. The tiger didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. It chuffed the low, breathy sound deep in its throat and stepped closer. The other tigers, realizing the human was awake, lifted their heads. There was no aggression in their posture, only a heavy, lazy curiosity. To them, the strange, hairless ape had passed the trial of the night. He had shared their warmth. He smelled of the pack, now musk and dust. The alpha leaned in, its massive nose inches from Kale's face. Kale could smell the dried blood on its muzzle. He held his breath, fighting the instinct to recoil. The tiger sniffed his neck, then his chest, right over his beating heart. It was a test, a final judgment. Then the beast did the impossible. It turned its back on him. It was the ultimate sign of trust in the wild. To turn one's back is to say, "I do not fear your teeth." The alpha walked toward the cave entrance, pausing to look back over its shoulder, waiting. Kale stood up. His legs were shaky, not from cold, but from awe. He followed the beast to the mouth of the cave. The storm had passed. The world outside was a blinding expanse of white, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow with dazzling brilliance. The air was crisp and painfully clean. Far below in the valley, Kale could see the faint trail of smoke from his former tribe's camp. They were burning morning fires, cooking food, laughing, safe in their ignorance. They believed Kale was a frozen corpse. They believed they were the masters of this land. Kale looked at his hands. They were dirty, bruised, and empty of weapons. But he felt a power surging through him that no spear could provide. He looked at the 10 beasts flanking him, sitting in the snow, watching the valley with stoic vigilance. He realized then that the hierarchy of the world was a lie. The humans huddled in their tents, fearing the dark, ruled by cruelty and fear. But here, among the monsters, there was a silent code of honor. The weak protected the weak. The broken supported the broken. A younger tiger, the runt of the coalition, nudged Kale's hand with its wet nose. Kale froze, then, slowly, trembling, reached out. He buried his fingers in the thick, coarse fur behind the cat's ears. The tiger leaned into the touch, closing its eyes. The connection was electric. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was the primal recognition of one soul to another. The barrier between species had shattered, broken by the shared trauma of abandonment. Kale looked back at the smoke of his tribe. He felt the phantom pain of Karn's betrayal, the sting of the cold wind on his naked skin the day before. But the anger was cooling, replaced by something colder and harder. He was no longer Kale, the Clovis hunter. He was something ancient. He was the 11th member of the pack. The alpha let out a roar that shook the snow from the nearby Pinza challenge to the silence. A declaration that they were still here, still alive, still dangerous. Kale didn't roar. He didn't need to. He simply stood amidst the giants, the cold wind whipping his hair, feeling the heat of 10 burning hearts surrounding him. He had gone into the cave to die, but the mountain had birthed him anew. He was a guardian now, and if the tribe ever returned to this mountain, they would not find a victim. They would find a war. The silence of the mountain was sacred, a stillness forged by ice and time. But to men like Karn, silence was not something to be respected, it was something to be broken. The crunch of heavy boots on snow shattered the peace of the morning. Karn led the way, his breath puffing in rhythmic bursts of steam, followed closely by his two most loyal enforcers, Tor and Var. They did not move with the grace of the wolf or the patience of the bear. They moved with the loud, clumsy confidence of men who believed they owned the earth beneath their feet. They weren't here for rescue, they were here for salvage. "He'll be frozen solid by now," Tor grunted, adjusting the heavy club at his belt, a statue of ice. Karn laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Better than he deserves. He has a necklace silk teeth and obsidian. I want it. It will look better on a true warrior." They reached the mouth of the forbidden cave. The air here was frankelder, sharper, carrying a scent that made Varric pause and grip his spear tighter. "You smell that?" Varric whispered, his eyes darting to the shadows. "Musk, old blood. It's a cave, you coward," Karn snapped, shoving him forward. "It smells of death. That is why we are here." They stepped across the threshold, leaving the blinding white of the snow for the oppressive gloom of the interior. Karn struck a flint, lighting a torch soaked in animal fat. The flame roared to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the jagged walls. They expected to find a corpse curled in the fetal position, blue and rigid, near the entrance. They expected to find the pathetic remains of a man who had been cast out. Instead, they found a fire. Deep in the belly of the cavern, a small, smokeless fire flickered, and sitting beside it, on a flat rock like a king on a throne, sat Kale. He was not dead, he was not shivering, he was stripped to his waist, his skin flushed with warmth, cleaning his fingernails with a small shard of flint. He looked up as the intruders approached, his face devoid of the fear that had defined his banishment. Karn stopped dead, the torch wavering in his hand. Confusion twisted his scarred face. You live, disappointed?" Kale asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the cavern with unnatural clarity. The shock on Karn's face quickly curdled into rage. It was an insult to his authority that this runt had survived the night. "You are like a roach, Kale, hard to crush." Karn stepped forward, the torchlight glinting off the bronze tip of his spear. But the cold was just the first test. "I am the second." Tor and Varric fanned out, flanking Kale, cutting off any escape route. The dynamic was familiar: three wolves cornering a rabbit. They grinned, sensing blood. "Give me the necklace," Karn demanded, extending a hand, "and maybe I'll make it quick." Kale didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't stand up. He just watched Karn with a strange, pitying expression. "You shouldn't have come here, Karn. This place, it doesn't belong to men. I go where I please," Karn roared, his voice booming against the ceiling. "I am the master of the valley. I am the—" Karn's shout was cut short. The sound didn't come from Kale. It came from everywhere at once. A low, vibrating rumble that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. It was a frequency so deep it rattled the teeth in Karn's skull. The torch in his hand flickered as a draft of air moved through the cavern, not a wind from outside, but an exhalation from within. Varric spun around, his eyes wide. What was that? Wind? Karn spat, though his grip on the spear whitened. "Just wind." "No," Kale said softly. "It's a warning." Kale stood up then, and as he rose, the shadows behind him began to detach themselves from the darkness. First, it was just the glint of eyes, amber, gold, burning with a predatory intelligence that froze the blood in Varric's veins. Then, the massive shapes stepped into the fringe of the torchlight. Tor dropped his club. The sound of it hitting the stone was the only noise in the sudden, terrified silence. A Sabertooth alpha slid out of the gloom to Kale's right. It was colossal, its shoulder height nearly matching Kale's chest. Its lips peeled back in a slow, deliberate snarl, revealing canines the length of a man's forearm. 2 Kales left. 2 more beasts emerged, their bodies low to the ground, muscles coiled like springs ready to snap. Karn took a step back, his arrogance evaporating like mist in the sun. He looked at the monsters, then he looked at Kale. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Kale hadn't survived by luck. He hadn't hidden from the beasts. He was standing with them. Sorcery, ... double quotes, Karn whispered, his voice trembling. You, ... you control them. No one controls the storm, Karn, Kale replied, his voice blending with the growls of the pack. You just learn to stand in it without breaking. The alpha let out a sound that was half-lafa, terrifying, wet rasp. It took a step toward Karn, its heavy paws making no sound on the rock. The smell of the human sphere, sweat, and aggression was a trigger. They were intruders in the sanctuary. Back, Karn screamed, waving the torch frantically. Back, you devils. The fire did not scare them. These were beasts of the ancient world. They had seen volcanoes and wildfires. The alpha swatted the air, and the wind from its paw alone nearly extinguished the flame. Run, Kale said. It wasn't a threat, it was advice. Varric and Tor didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled backward, tripping over their own feet, abandoning their weapons in a desperate scramble for the exit. But Karn stood frozen, his pride warring with his survival instinct. He looked at the beast, then at the man he had banished. For a moment, the world hung in the balance. The justice of the wild was staring Karn in the face, breathing hot death into the air. You are dead, Kale, Karn screamed, a final, desperate denial of reality. You are dead. Kale merely tilted his head, his hand resting lightly on the alpha's neck. We are all dead, Karn, Kale whispered. Some of us just haven't fallen down yet. Then the alpha lunged. The cave did not witness a battle. A battle implies 2 sides with a chance of victory. What happened in the flickering half-light of the dropped torch was not a fight, it was a correction. Nature was correcting a mistake. Karn, the warlord who had snapped the necks of wolves and wrestled bears for sport, crumbled under the weight of the alpha. There was no room for technique, no space to swing a spear. There was only the overwhelming, crushing mass of 400 pounds of muscle and fury. The sound was terrible. It was the wet, guttural snarling of a predator doing what it was evolved to do, mixed with the frantic, high-pitched shrieks of a man realizing he is not a god. Karn's ivory spear, the symbol of his rule, snapped like a dry twig under the alpha's paw. The sound of the breaking would echoed louder than the screams. It was the sound of his authority shattering. Tor and Varric did not look back. The primal brain, the lizard part of the mind that governs survival, took over. They scrambled over the slick rocks of the entrance, slipping on ice and terror, diving out into the blinding snow. They ran until their lungs burned, driven by the roar that chased them down, the mountainous sound that would haunt their nightmares until they died. Inside, the chaos settled into a heavy, breathing silence. Karn was not dead yet. The Alpha had backed away, its chest heaving, its muzzle stained crimson. It sat on its haunches, watching the broken man with dispassionate amber eyes. It was not cruelty. Animals are not cruel. It was simply done. The threat was neutralized. Karn dragged himself backward, his breath coming in wet, ragged gasps. He looked up at Kale. The arrogance was gone, scrubbed away by the abrasive reality of death. In its place was a pathetic, naked pleading. Kale, ... Karn wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Call, ... Call it off. Help me. Kale stood motionless. The firelight danced in his eyes, but it found no warmth there. He looked at the man who had stripped him of his furs. He looked at the man who had sentenced him to freeze while the tribe watched in silence. I cannot, Kale said softly. His voice was not angry. It was hollow, like the wind through a ravine. You, ... You command them, Karn begged, reaching out a trembling, bloody hand. I do not command them, Karn. I never did, Kale replied, stepping closer, the other tigers parting to let him pass. He crouched down, looking Karn in the eye. You thought power was about force, about who strikes the hardest, but true power is loyalty, and you earned none. Kale stood up. He didn't signal the tigers. He didn't need to. The pact was simple. The pack protects its own. Karn was an intruder who had threatened a pack member. The logic of the wild is absolute. The mountain has judged you, Kale whispered. He turned his back. Behind him there was a sudden, sharp movement, and then silence. Kale stepped out into the sunlight. He did not flinch. He did not look back. The air outside was cold, but Kale no longer felt it. A fire burned inside him now, fire stoked by a justice that was older than words. Weeks passed, the winter deepened, burying the world in a shroud of white. Down in the valley, the Clovis tribe changed. Tor and Varric had returned, pale and shaking, speaking in hushed tones of a demon of the mountain and his army of ghosts. They said Karn had been consumed by the earth itself. The tribe lived in fear, casting nervous glances at the jagged peaks of the black crags, leaving offerings of meat at the edge of the forest to appease the spirits. But they never saw Kale again. High above the clouds, where the air was thin and the wind was pure, a different life had begun. Kale sat on the edge of a precipice, his legs dangling over a drop that fell away into mist. He was no longer wearing the thin, tattered tunic of a slave. He was draped in heavy furs, not stolen, but scavenged from the kills the pack had made. Around his neck, he wore no obsidian or gold, but a single curved claw on a leather thong. Beside him sat the Alpha. The great cat's winter coat had grown thick and lustrous. The wound on its flank had healed into a silver line of scar tissue. They sat in comfortable silence, watching a herd of mammoths migrate through the valley floor, far below tiny specks of brown against the white. Kale reached out and rested his hand on the tiger's massive head. The beast closed its eyes and leaned into the touch, a low rumble vibrating in its throat. It was a sound of contentment, of safety. The man who had been rejected by humanity had found his humanity among the beasts. He had learned that savage was just a word used by men to describe things they could uncontrol. He was no longer a warrior of the Clovis. He was a walker of the high paths. He was the brother of the storm. We survive, Kale whispered to the wind. The Alpha opened its eyes, looking at Kale with a gaze that held the wisdom of 1,000 winters. It stood up and nudged Kale's shoulder, urging him back toward the cave, toward the warmth of the family that waited in the dark. Kale smiled, rare, true smile. He stood and followed the beast into the shadows. The wind erased their footprints moments later, leaving no trace for the world below to follow. They were not a story to be told around a campfire anymore. They were a legend, and legends never die. They just wait for the next winter.
The embers of our fire are fading for tonight, but the legend of Kale and his guardians will remain. If this story touched your spirit and you want to secure your place on our next journey through the Ice Age, subscribe to the channel now. Do not let the pack leave without you. And now, I ask for your wisdom. What did you think of Kale's fate? Do you believe the wild justice of the tigers was deserved? Write your thoughts in the comments below. The tribe wants to hear your voice.